Hello and welcome to today's webinar, Setting the Stage for Wisconsin's Affordable Clean Energy Transition. Thank you to today's event partners. You can see their logos on the screen here, the Midwest Renewable Energy Association, or MREA, the Wisconsin Conservative Energy Forum, and Renew Wisconsin. If these are new organizations to you, I highly encourage that you Google them, check out what they're all about. Of course, we have representatives as part of our panel today, so you'll learn a little bit more today as well. The webinar is being recorded and a version of it will be posted to YouTube for public viewing. I also want to acknowledge today's webinar support from Evolution Marketing, Lisa Giesenbauer, who you'll see commenting in the chat. She's going to collect questions. So if you have questions as we go along, comments, thoughts you want to share, please share them in the chat. Pull up the Q&A window. She'll be tracking that. If you have particularly technical questions, or maybe you have questions you don't want to share with everyone here, include your contact info directly to Lisa, and we can make sure either a CUB staff person or one of our panelists follow up with you directly to answer your question. We're also enabling the closed captioning on this webinar. To access it, just click the box at the bottom of your screen that has the CC inside of it. So I am Heather Goetsch. I am a board member with the Citizens Utility Board of Wisconsin, or CUB. I'm here because consumer protection is critical with utility service. The money you pay to your utility should be affordable for you and your family, spent responsibly by the utility, and result in reliable service. CUB represents all of us in Wisconsin and advocates for all these things. So if you're not a member and you think this is important too, please consider supporting our work and become a member today. And so with that, we are here to talk about setting the stage for Wisconsin's affordable clean energy transition. So what does that mean? Let's hop into it. I'm happy to welcome 3 subject matter experts to talk about what this means for energy in Wisconsin and what it means for you and your family. First, we have Nick Hyla, Executive Director at MREA. He's going to open the discussion by talking about what decisions can or should Wisconsin make today for our electricity system. He'll highlight a national study that gives us a model for what we could do. Next, Scott Cohenen, Executive Director at the Wisconsin Conservative Energy Forum, will dive into energy production and cost pressures. He'll highlight how we can realistically push for solutions. Then Corey Singletary, Director of Regulatory Affairs at CUB, will get into greater detail about what this all means for us as ratepayers, us folks who pay our utility bills, and opportunity for a more equitable model. We'll continue the discussion with your questions. So again, if you have questions, thoughts, comments you want to share as we go along, please use the chat, use the Q&A function. We'll come back and Lisa will highlight them for us in the final part of our webinar today. So with that, I'm going to hand it over to Nick, who's going to get us started.
Good. Well, I've been given the task of kind of providing some general context for an energy transition. As Heather mentioned, I'm Nick Hyla from the Midwest Renewable Energy Association. We do education around renewables and efficiency, and we do a lot of training, host a big public education event. And so it's my pleasure to be here with the great people at CUB and to talk about the potential clean energy transition. And so we think about an energy transition, if I can get my slides to move, it really is talking about the biggest machine on earth, which is the utility grid. The United States has the second biggest machine on earth compared to China. Bigger isn't always better, though. And this system has been built over the last 100 years to electrify the U.S. economy. You know, we are technically, as a country, still industrializing. If you think about the utility build-outs in Europe, say in Germany or France, with the geography they have, they were built out much sooner than ours. So there's still options to change the way we do things and to improve the system that we have as technologies advance. But you can see there is a lot of sunk cost there, 476,000 miles of transmission lines, 55,000 substations, 6.3 million lines of distribution lines. The system is has a very simple operating parameter. Supply must equal demand or failures occur. And this kind of represents the system as it has been imagined and how it has been built in the regulatory model that we've created. And it's really a few very large machines owned by private companies that enjoy a monopoly over their ratepayers, and built and maintained by affiliated unions. And the transition is really started and is beginning with this idea of that those small machines are turning into a more distributed platform powered by wind and solar. If you look at in the Wisconsin system of all the things that are planned to be built, 99% of everything that utilities are planning are wind, solar, and battery storage because of cost. There's no mandate in Wisconsin, federal or state, for utilities to do this. They're doing this because they're making a determination that this is the least cost generating asset. And that's really plugging into the existing system as we know it. Another thing that's really pushing the transition is electrification. And this chart comes from the Solar Future Study commissioned by the U.S. Department of Energy. And what you'll see on the left-hand side is kind of a model of the current grid with the left-hand side being the sources. You can see a significant amount of fossil fuels and the flows into where that electricity goes. And but what you'll see on the right is projections for electrification as we move our container fuel vehicles into electric, as we move natural gas supplies to electric, as we bring people with container fuel on the electricity grid. The more and more we electrify, the bigger the grid gets. And so this is an opportunity to reconsider how that grid operates. And as we invest in the utility system, the current business model is one in which investors get paid by building things, and we pay them back as ratepayers in our future rates, that cost plus interest. So in essence, it's in our best interest in the future to control the costs. And that's what Citizens Utility Board does in front of the Public Service Commission. And what they advocate for is making sure that we're making the highest value, least cost investments for the future. But this electrification future of significantly growing the number of electrons on the grid poses a real significant question about how that build out is done. One of the challenges with the current system is it's incredibly wasteful. If you map energy as it flows through the U.S. economy, as Lawrence Livermore National Laboratory does, what you'll see is that only 33% of the electricity that we generate is actually transformed into a useful service, and 67% of that energy is wasted. Now, you can think of that as wasted energy, or you can think of it as wasted money, because the more energy that we can perform and transform into useful service, the less energy we need. And energy is a limited quantity and has high associated costs, and those costs are increasing. And so more and more what we see, because of the falling prices of solar, the increased value of efficiency, the advances of technologies and innovations such as demand response and electric vehicles and energy storage, is that we are walking our way into a new type of grid that not only has this kind of top-down energy transmission from the transmission system into the distribution system, but also a suite of new small machines placed with the loads, the electricity loads that we use. This is this kind of like distributed energy grid, and this is pushing on this idea of what the utility business model is and what the opportunities are for the future. And as costs decline, the question in front of us is, what is the highest value investment for future ratepayers, both in the terms of costs and resiliency and economic development and all of the associated things that we can think about with the electricity grid, because the future is electric and energy underwrites everything. And it's a fundamental aspect of how economies develop. So one of the core principles of the energy transition is that what is the real value of efficiency? And if you look through any system that uses electricity and the step-down losses that occur, what you'll notice, for example, on this chart, just into the industrial pumping of water, is that we'll put 100 units of energy in at the combustion plant. And by the time that water gets out the pipe, we're really delivering 9.5 units of energy, which is a 10x loss. If you look at it the other way, what this graph says is if we save 1 unit of energy as an end user, we save 10 times as much at the beginning of the process. Now, you can think about that in energy, or you can think about that in economic terms as value, with energy being a cost and in limited supply. Getting the same amount of service for less electricity use means cheaper business operation, means better household budget. The other piece of this equation is if you look over time at all of the homes in the United States of America that need energy improvements, what you'll see is, starting in 1980, if you kind of look at all the ways that we've tried to stimulate energy efficiency, you can think about it through like home performance with Energy Star. That's kind of like this blue line here that's like tapers off in 2020. You can see leverage, which is like finance systems. You can see the Weatherization Assistance Program, which is a subsidized program for low to moderate income households. You can see this yellow bump here. That was the American Recovery and Reinvestment Act funding after the mortgage default crisis that created a bunch of weatherization activity. And you can see this kind of like dead pledge, the Build Back Better program, how much weatherization, and home performance and energy efficiency would have occurred from there. But what you really notice is that if we really wanted to be more energy efficient, if we really wanted to upgrade the energy performance of US homes, we'd actually be needing to do 4 million homes a year, which is represented in this blue graph. And so I put this in here just to showcase the opportunity of energy savings that would save, as we know in Wisconsin from the Focus on Energy audits, would save all ratepayers money. For every dollar we put in, it saves $5 for future ratepayers. So it's a tremendous, tremendous opportunity, and a core aspect of this concept of an energy transition is a wiser use of electricity. Another technology, this solar technology, which is modular, scalable, distributed, produces electricity when the sun shines, has zero fuel costs, has a 25-year warranty, and has been massively deployed across this country in the last 10 years, produces power where the power is needed. Now, it doesn't produce it all the time. It does tend to produce it during peak times. It's definitely intermittent and variable, but it has a value to the utility system. And study after study, when a commission requires a study for value of solar, shows that in markets like Wisconsin, in markets like Minnesota, Iowa, Michigan, that these assets, when placed on the grid with private money, that they save all ratepayers money. Now, as the deployment gets greater and greater, and as loads shift, and depending on the system, that may not be the case. But another interesting aspect of the energy transition is energy storage. And energy storage is similar today as solar was 10 years ago, is that we're seeing just a increase in deployment and a decrease in costs and an increase in functionality and versatility of application. What you'll notice when you look at energy storage deployment on the utility system, as described in this graph, is that there is one type of energy storage deployment that provides the entire service suite of energy storage to the grid, and that's meter-connected energy storage. From efficiency to distributed solar to energy storage, all of these new technology adoptions push on the utility business model and empower the customer to be an energy player that saves costs for all ratepayers. So when we look at this idea of distributed energy resource optimization for a grid, right, changing from that top-down approach to one where in the distribution system, new actors are playing a role in reducing energy and shifting load and providing grid service. When you look at that from an economic lens, what you find, and what this study has found, and many other studies are finding, is that it saves everybody money, because we invest in the megawatt, the destruction of demand in the distribution system to avoid large capital investments in the transmission system and distribution system that we paid back plus interest over time. And so one of the real challenges is thinking about, from a regulatory context and a legislative context, how do we transition this utility business model that has delivered us this incredible grid that has underwritten our economic growth, that is by all accounts reliable, and is what I would consider for most people affordable, though, the dynamics of the way that rates are designed and the pressure upward on rates that's changing very rapidly. How do we incentivize and regulate and manage this new, one person invented a Tesla, the car that has captivated the imagination and started the electrification of vehicle fleets, the disruptions of solar technology and financing and energy efficiency and software applications. All of these things are very real and very in the market, and they're not something that we can ignore, especially if they create jobs, reduce costs, stimulate local economic development. The challenges, though, are really one that we have to consider at a state level, because we are a balkanized energy market. Every state sets, for the most part, their own rules, and every utility, regulated utility, should be responsible to regulators and legislators to abide by those rules and roll out those rules. But this process is long and cumbersome and calcified, because a capital-intensive industry that enjoys lots of influence over legislators and regulators is calcified and hard to change. And this is the trick here, is to recognize the very real and durable value that utility companies provide to all the people of Wisconsin, while at the same time recognizing that change and figuring out how best to move this ship so that we don't trap ourselves in an outdated model with high costs and limited abilities for customers to escape those costs. And the vision is a future grid that's fully optimized, that has two systems. As Mary Powell, the former CEO of Green Mountain Power, had said, when we invented the automobile, we didn't get rid of the railroads. We managed the railroads and the highway system side by side. And so the promise of an energy transition is really one of less cost and more jobs if it's done correctly, having these two systems operating together, strengthening each other, and creating a new electricity business model that brings us into this electric future, this new grid transition. And so we were asked to kind of give some action items at the end. And I think the thing that I've really appreciated for all my professional career, but I think has really come to the forefront over the last few years, is this idea of, what if we called people in rather than calling them out? And this political stalemate and this oppositional mindset that we tend to have with each other is not in service of us as a state being competitive economically or socially. And so my take-home message is, our number one, use less energy. We all should understand. I give presentations all over the state, all over the Midwest. I always ask, as a first question, who here knows how much they pay per kilowatt hour on the utility bill? And usually there's 1 to 0 people, and that person is usually sitting in the back, and they're usually a farmer. And most people really don't pay attention to their electricity use. And so using less energy and using it wisely is the best way for all of us to save money on our utility bill and to save money in future energy costs. The other is, there are common ground issues by which we can all agree on for the most part, and those should be where we start this conversation. And then finally, energy is everything. Our future is tied, all of our economic future is tied to the energy decisions we make today. And so we should prioritize that as we vote. Thank you very much for your time.
Thanks for kicking us off, Nick. Next, we're going to hand it over to Scott. There we go.
Perfect. Everybody should be able to see my screen, right?
Yes.
Excellent. Well, Heather, I appreciate it. Thank you. It's an honor to follow up on Nick's presentation a little bit here and contribute to the conversation a little bit. I am Scott Coonan. I'm the Executive Director of Wisconsin Conservative Energy Forum. I'll give you guys just a little bit of a background for a second on our organization. Then I'd like to dive in a little bit to kind of dovetail a little with Nick's presentation, but maybe put a little bit of a focus on cost pressures from a residential perspective in Wisconsin, and things that are happening right now that I think are going to dramatically change the stage in the next 10 years about what we're talking about. Because we're living, it seems like we've been saying that for the last few years, but we're living in unprecedented times right now as we speak, right? So I started the organization, Wisconsin Conservative Energy Forum, about 5 years ago, a little over 5 years ago. And my idea behind this was I saw this rush of new technology, right? You have solar, wind, electric vehicles, battery storage, broadly clean energy tech, right? I saw that kind of rushing into the marketplace, saw it kind of changing. You could see the economics of solar and wind, crashing. They're now competitive in the marketplace, as Nick said. And I saw a lot of change, and the facts on the ground were really changing, and the technology was changing. I did not see that change moving its way into the political debate that we were having, right? I think a lot that we are still stuck talking about energy as if it's like the first term of the Bush administration, right? Like we are still stuck in early 2000 when it's 2022, right? And a lot of stuff has happened. So my organization, we wanted to try and take a new approach to some of this stuff, emphasize new technology, find a pragmatic way forward. Recognize that kind of the all or nothing debate that we get into often at the federal level, 100% clean, 0% clean, whatever, that doesn't really serve anybody well. It's not a productive conversation, and it's really not a realistic conversation that we need to have. So we wanted to try and be a conservative messenger, maybe more right of center business approach to this. But at the end of the day, what I wanted to do was expand what we understood as the definition of responsible resource development, because there are other resources that we can develop now to give us energy. So the focus is on technology, innovation. We really are hoping to foster what we think can be a competitive expansion of clean energy technology in the state. And recognize that at the end of the day, I think for a lot of people, whether you're a business, you're a resident, whatever, you're a ratepayer, sustainability is really a bottom line value. As Nick said, the cheapest electron that you're going to have is the one that you don't use because you're not paying for it, right? So our principles are fairly simple. It's market driven. We want cost effective, reliable. We want things to be homegrown, whether we're talking about the United States or even the state of Wisconsin, or even in our own backyards in our communities. So apply those business principles to energy markets that are obviously changing really, really rapidly. So I want to focus just a little bit on costs for the rest of this discussion. I will say energy cost pressures have been fairly subdued for a decade in this state. I think the utilities have done our utilities and our cooperatives in the state have done a really good job keeping a lid on prices over the last 10 years. We've largely switched our system from one backed a lot by coal to natural gas, to coal and natural gas. And that coal to natural gas switch for the last 10 years has really held prices in check very, very well. That, as I'm sure everybody is aware, listening to the news, that is about to change very, very, very quickly and very historically. Low cost renewables have been coming online in the last couple of years, have helped to keep things in check as well. As you kind of retire some of the old infrastructure, move into some of the new, it helps to have that cheap natural gas, or what was cheap natural gas. And it also helps to have relatively marginal low cost renewables on the grid. Both of those things to some degree are starting to end across the country. So energy across sources is about to get historically expensive. So you can see this chart here. I'll just take Wisconsin Public Service, about a 20% increase in residential costs over the last decade. I think is actually probably fairly reasonable, right? And can be put into a fairly decent budget. So over the last decade, as I've kind of said, we've had the natural gas decade. You can see our sources largely here. This is all electricity generation. We've switched from coal, which has dominated our electric system for decades and decades. Largely, it's been a coal versus natural gas story. People want to roll renewables into this discussion, and typically people want to blame renewables for what's happening negatively right now. This really hasn't been the story. Over the last decade plus, We've switched out of coal and into natural gas because natural gas was an extremely abundant, very inexpensive source. It's cleaner to burn, it's easier to transport. And at the end of the day, it's also very, very much locally sourced here in our country. We have a lot of natural gas. So it made a lot of sense to do that switch. I will say there is a downside here that is obviously being exposed in current events. We are doubling up our natural gas use, right? We are using natural gas for heating in this state in the Northern Hemisphere. We are also now increasingly using it for electricity generation. So the natural gas decade, I think at least, is over. This is what natural gas prices look like globally. You can see Europe and Asia are the really big hockey sticks up in the last couple of months. It's been very, very well publicized, but even in the United States, we've seen a doubling of natural gas prices because our market ultimately at the end of the day is tied to international markets as well. And the more that we try to export to Europe and Asia, the more that our domestic supplies probably get a little bit tighter. I had somebody the other day kind of phrase it to me, we can either use natural gas here to power our air conditioners, or we can ship that natural gas abroad right now to keep Europeans from freezing to death this winter, right? That's an exaggeration for sure. It's an exaggeration, but it's definitely something that we need to consider as we go forward here. So this is what Wisconsin's energy mix looks like broadly, right? These are the sources that we use in Wisconsin: coal, natural gas. We're still largely a state that is kind of dominated by fossil fuels and some of the old line fossil fuel infrastructure. I think, as Nick said, that is changing very rapidly too. In the next 5 to 10 years, utilities, cooperatives are working very, very hard to introduce at industrial scale a lot of clean energy technology and a lot of clean energy generation. So this pie chart will change dramatically as we go forward, but that natural gas piece of 35% is really going to drive cost for us in the next 10 years, in the next 5 to 10 years. So cost pressures are here, right? We will see some historic increases in energy prices in the next year, in the next 2 years, probably within the next decade. Coal to natural gas, that switch to some degree is really backfiring on us now. Low-cost renewables that are coming online in a lot of other states, maybe this isn't the case here in Wisconsin, but in a lot of other states, we planted wind energy. I take Iowa, for example, right? Iowa, Minnesota, and even the Dakotas, they've put a lot of wind energy kind of in the western ends of those states. Now they're running out of transmission lines, right? They're running out of pipeline to put those electrons onto. So we are going to be looking at a very significant investment in transmission infrastructure to continue to build out renewable energy, because renewables are located in different areas than some of our other power plants were for the last 100 years. So you have to run different lines to connect those things, right? So renewables are increasingly going to be coming with the cost of added transmission investments. So our systems largely are under pressure. As Nick said, we have the most sophisticated, awesome, huge system here that we built, but that system is creaking to some degree because it is 100, 150 years old. So that is requiring investment, it's requiring attention. We also have other added pressures. So what can customers do? I think customers largely need to start looking to leverage technology, right? Individuals have an opportunity here to take greater control. I will emphasize what Nick said here. There are building blocks that you can use, whether you own a business or whether you own a home or you're a ratepayer of some type. Know your energy profile and use. You can use energy efficiency. You can use solar. You can use storage. There's electrified transportation, even electrified heating to some degree. Heat pumps are starting to become more competitive. All of these things will be competitive, consumer-oriented markets. They will be a thing where you can call up a solar contractor right now and get a quote from them. You can call up a different solar contractor, get a competitive quote, right? These are consumer markets that are increasingly emerging across the country and other states. And residents in the state of Wisconsin should be able to utilize these markets to try and keep their own costs in check. But also, I think, as Nick said, largely we can use some of these things to lower the pressure on our overall system. There is a ton of pressure that we are putting on our system right now. It's pretty hot outside, sun's blaring, ACs are running everywhere. If you can lower the pressure on the system, you lower the cost for everybody. So that being said, I just wanted to detail this map too. Your communities will be touched by this one way or another. This is a map of all the utility scale, really large scale wind, solar, and battery storage facilities that are at least in the plans to be built across the state of Wisconsin. There's something like 40 counties where we're tracking projects right now over the next 5 years. Your community in one way or another will be touched some way by clean energy technology. Is probably largely going to be solar panels, right? But I think I would urge everybody to make that a positive thing. There is opportunity. Yes, there are absolutely challenges to this kind of development, but make it positive. And I'll end with just my call to action real quick, guys. Be realistic. Every single technology that we use to generate energy has limitations, right? They all have advantages. They all have disadvantages. New technology is genuinely disruptive. I agree with Nick on that. It's disruptive to the system, but we have to remember the positives and the negatives, and we have to pursue this in a pragmatic way that recognizes that it's not all good, right? There's not all good in anything. There's not all bad in anything. Obviously, I would agree with Nick. Intermittency is an issue. There is a ceiling for renewables on the grid, whether that is transmission ceiling or whether it's intermittency ceiling. Both system and distributed energy has a ceiling at a certain point. We have issues in Wisconsin around competitive markets. Decentralization and increased business and residential control is really, really key for us. Access is key. Access to these technologies will be very, very key as we go forward. And frankly, people in the state of Wisconsin have very limited access compared to other states across the country. So new technology demands new markets and it demands new regulation. This has always been the case. I will point out community solar is a very, very, very unique opportunity for a market in Wisconsin here. So remember, the markets are competitive. Everybody that's a resident should look for a group buy or look to put in multiple bids. You can even join together with your neighbors to try to up your buying leverage. And we can talk maybe a little bit more about that. But the main key here, I think we should push for some sort of bipartisan policy. There are measured and pragmatic steps that we can take to move forward on this. It's not an overnight transformation, right? It's taken a century to get here, and it will probably take us a century to get the next system, right? But measured and pragmatic implementation is key. So with that, I will thank everybody, and I will turn it back over.
Thank you, Scott. And I definitely want to come back and talk about that transition point with everyone. But first, please remember, if you have questions for the panel, things you want us to address later, go into more detail, click the Q&A button and you can ask it there. You can ask it anonymously. You could assign your name to it. Just a quick reminder to everyone who's here that that's there. And with that, I'm going to hand it over to Corey.
Thanks, Heather. So one thing that Heather didn't mention when we started is that Nick and Scott secretly work for CUB, because everything that they've said, I've been teed up great in terms of my role of kind of batting cleanup here in the third position. But really, I think they did a really good job of setting the stage. So I'll kind of step through based off, from kind of how they've laid the framework here, how we at CUB look at this issue, this transition, this clean energy transition, or however you kind of want to frame this industry transition, this transition in our economy. The way we look at it is we step back and say, what is our role as the Citizens Utility Board? And there's a couple places, you can start for, CUB was created back in 1979, as an act of the legislature, to pull straight from or to paraphrase the statute, to promote the health, welfare, and prosperity of all the citizens of the state, to represent and protect the interests of residential utility customers before regulatory agencies, the legislature, other public bodies, to provide consumer education, utility service costs of benefits. And, those are all things that we continue to do. And most recently last year, Wisconsin Act 24 put into law what's right in front of you. It says it is in the public interest that there be an independent, nonpartisan consumer advocate for residential, small commercial, and small industrial energy utility customers of the state. And that's where we start from, right? Is that our job is to represent everyone within those groups, and which is a tricky balancing act. And if you folks who have been in the industry for a while, there's a bunch of different ways that people kind of consider the role of a consumer advocate. Where we start is that we consider ourselves a data and evidence-driven decision-making body. When we look at issues, we don't walk in necessarily with a predetermined outcome that we think is right or is wrong. We let the evidence take us to the right answer. And the sort of traditional view of the utility industry and sort of the priorities within utility regulation and what the customer needs is safety, reliability, and affordability. Those are sort of sacred benchmarks and principles within the utility industry for basically the last 100 years. But as Scott and both Nick very artfully and eloquently articulated, that the utility industry is in transition. And we feel that to a certain extent, this transition requires a reevaluation of those key outcomes for customers. Certainly safety, reliability, and affordability remain true, right? Those are absolute musts. Safety and reliability are just not assumed as in we take it for granted, but those absolutely have to be the case. Affordability is something that we seek to make certain exist on top of those two principles. The last one, though, is I think for a lot of people in this space a little bit newer consideration is equity. The way that utilities have been regulated for most of the past 100 years is through the lens of economic regulation, and really trying to drive towards kind of textbook economic efficiency. But as a lot of people are very well aware, and as Nick and Scott have highlighted, it is not the case that that everyone has the same experience with their utility. Not everyone has the same access to opportunities to benefit from even the existing system, to say nothing of a transformed utility system. And the one thing I will throw out there is that the definitions of safety, reliability, affordability, and equity will vary depending on who you ask, right? How safe is safe enough? How affordable? What constitutes affordable service? What is fair? What is equitable? So I do have to kind of concede that is a subjective item. So, from our perspective, in this clean energy transition, we've been primarily focusing on affordability and equity. Again, because for us, if the system's not safe, if the system's not reliable, that's kind of non-starters. And there's different ways to think about affordability, and a lot of which Nick and Scott have already kind of touched on. You can kind of think of it in terms of the overall cost to serve utility customers. Essentially, how big is the pie? What's the pot of money that's needed to make the utility system go and deliver service to everyone who needs it, to make certain that when you flip the switch that the light goes on? You could think of it in terms of, the average cost to every customer within the system. You could look at the average cost within a group, let's just say homeowners or residents or small businesses. You could also consider it in terms of, absolute or relative savings. If we're thinking about, maybe lowering utility costs, are we talking about lowering it in absolute terms today and that my bill tomorrow will be lower than it was yesterday, or just, controlling upward pressure? Right. Scott highlighted a bunch of things, for example, transmission costs, which I'll touch on a little bit later, that are driving utility costs, things like new investment in new resources. So are we trying to what's our goal in terms of how we achieve affordability? Right. And, one of the things that, when we look at the trends, right, Scott put up on the screen a trend of utility bills, or at least a 10-year snapshot of utility bills for Wisconsin investor-owned utilities. And it highlights some fairly large increases. And if you dig a little bit deeper, this is from the draft strategic energy assessment that the Public Service Commission put out about a little less than a month ago for public comment. And in that, it includes this sort of snapshot look over the last 10 years of the major drivers in utility rates. And the big things I want to kind of draw attention to are the three bars on the left: generation, fuel, and transmission. Right. When people think about the clean energy transition, the thing that most people think about is unfortunately not what Nick and Scott have been talking about, which is, the negawatt, which is reducing your footprint to begin with, but things like the major investments in solar and other battery storage and other resources that the utilities have been making. that will continue to add to this column on the generation side. On the upside, when solar is a zero fuel cost resource, the sun is free, and so that will help drive the fuel costs down. Transmission, Scott highlighted transmission congestion. Those, as we continue to need to invest in the system to bring in renewables from the West, whether it be from Iowa or Minnesota, or to just reinforce the system for resilience or reliability purposes, that again will generate upward pressure, right? So those are kind of the targets there, and I think that in this clean energy transition, there are opportunities for whether it be demand side reductions through weatherization, through energy efficiency, through behind the meter resources, or through smart investment at the utility scale to manage the balance of how all these things ultimately flow down to customers, right? It can't just ideally it shouldn't just be pushing rates to the ceiling here. And part of that too, when we look at it, is I think Nick started his talk talking about the grid as the biggest, most complicated machine mankind has ever created, and I believe that. And one of the things that I think we want to make certain we don't lose sight of is that we've invested billions, if not trillions of dollars into this system, which by and large is, it works. It's efficient, and it has some spots that we need to work on. But what we don't want to do, is lose the efficiencies that grid can provide, right? What we don't want is a system where that ends up so broken that people are incentivized to essentially defect from the utility system, because that leaves folks kind of holding the bag. And so there's a way to, as Nick put it, ensure that there are low-cost, high-value investments made throughout the entire spectrum, from the customer all the way up to the utility, to make certain that we control cost. And this is sort of a classic traditional frame that CUB works in. Keeping rates down, keeping the bills low for customers. The extra layer that I mentioned, which is kind of a new, and I am a little ashamed to say that it is new in terms of a topic within utility industry, is equity. It's the realization that even under the current framework, there are people for whom, if we're looking at, say, affordability, that the utility service is not affordable for them. All right, that essentially, no matter what, that there will be people that are unable to regularly pay their utility bills, and then end up in unfortunate situations where they're facing disconnection or arrearages and late charges, and sort of an economic snowball that really doesn't help anyone at the end of the day. All right, and the way that we kind of approach it is using equity as sort of a lens, right? If we look at sort of core principles, which, like safety, reliability, and affordability, is asking ourselves the question of, when we're looking at metrics, however we're measuring safety, right? Are the outcomes equitable? When you're looking at reliability might be a good example as a hypothetical, right? You could have, you can imagine a situation where there may be disadvantaged communities that, for one reason or another, have lower system reliability than a rich part of the system, as a hypothetical, right? Affordability, again, what I'd mentioned before, that there are just some folks for whom it's just not, the system is not affordable. And so that's sort of the traditional frame. If we apply equity to it, is, how are we affecting people? Are the outcomes fair? Does the system serve everyone in a way that we believe it should be? But, as we apply it towards the energy transition, it's some of the things that Scott and Nick talked about, particularly Scott, I think he mentioned access there at the end, is, we ask ourselves, can everyone benefit? Will everyone be able to benefit from this clean energy transition, right? Whether it be indirect benefits, as in terms of the size of the pie getting smaller, so everyone's rates get lower, or it could be direct benefits of someone being able to leverage technology on a heat pump or home weatherization to lower their costs. Can everyone participate? This kind of really more gets into this access question. Some of it is economic, but some of it is public policy. The commission today just opened 2 investigations to look into whether or not third-party ownership or solar leasing arrangements are legal within the state of Wisconsin. or subject to some form of utility regulation. And I think these types of questions about access and from the public policy perspective are going to be really important, particularly as Scott highlighted, as the technology continues to evolve kind of faster than the laws and the regulation can keep up with it. And again, in terms of, equity and access and participation is again, making certain that affordability is a bedrock principle and making certain we're, to the extent that we can, that we're not leaving people behind and that we avoid, to use a wonky term in our industry, undue discrimination, right? Before I close, I'll back this up here. Couple of things I wanted to just kind of circle back to. Nick, I think used the word platform. And I think that's really relevant in terms of looking at the utility industry, not only from a technology and regulation standpoint, but also just how the customer interacts with their utility. And that the evolution of technology is really going to change the role of the utility from just this sort of monolithic service provider to a platform, to the utility as a conductor is a term that people have been using in the industry. And I think that is something that's going to change the way that people interact with their utilities. In fact, yesterday I got a notification via email that said that my utility was going to be dialing back my thermostat between 3 and 5 p.m. to manage peak demand right now, today, from 3 to 5 p.m. And I think that changing nature of that relationship is going to be key for all of us to help folks with education and resources. And then one other thing I wanted to layer on from the cost pressure discussion that Scott teed up is the issue of what do we do with the clunkers that we got in the garage, right? We're putting in all this new solar, we're putting in new battery electric storage, and the costs have come down and the economics look great. But the fact remains that we haven't paid off the old plants yet, right? It's like it's 2005 again, and you got a giant SUV in the garage that gets 4 miles to the gallon, and you'd like to buy a Prius. But unlike with a car where you can sell it and largely get rid of that debt cost, with a power plant, it's a little different. And so the struggle that we are facing right now is trying to figure out a way to not have customers pay twice for resources, to minimize that sort of stranded asset impact for customers as we move through this transition, because that's ultimately sort of that might be an area where we could actually achieve lower rates tomorrow than we have today, if we can crack that nut on top of all the other things that we've already discussed today. So the delivery, the actionable, we're all asked to do an actionable, and I'm going to have mine be entirely self-serving because I think Nick and Scott hit a lot of the really good high points in terms of individual steps. But I did want to highlight that I think that participation in the regulatory process is sorely needed. Most folks know how to interact politically, who to talk to, who to call, who to give money to, whatever the case might be. But in the sort of wonky regulation world that CUB works in, that's not the case. And while CUB provides the customers with the technical representation before the regulator, that doesn't mean that individual customer participation isn't important. And it's absolutely vital that the regulators hear the individual stories from customers and how this clean energy transition affects them. So I recommend folks to, go to the PSC website. I've provided a link here. That'll be, I believe we're going to share the presentations after the fact, or you can just write it down. And definitely provide any comments in cases or issues that interest and directly affect you. I do have to emphasize that directly affect you part because the commission, the commission has to only consider things that are for people that have standing. But absolutely participate in all venues, all the ones that Nick and Scott discussed, as well as in the regulatory sphere. But with that, thanks.
Thank you, Corey. Thank you also again, Nick and Scott. I think this was an excellent transition of information throughout. Just to quick summarize or highlight, we talked as far as action goes, we definitely talked about voting, getting activated in that way. We talked about using less energy, taking control of your energy bill and what you can in your home, whether you're a homeowner or just starting the conversation. If you're a renter, what are some things you could do within your home to take control of energy efficiency. Something that I like to talk about a lot, you're thinking about solar, put that panel on the roof, right? The first thing you need to do is make your home or your building as energy efficient as possible. Use the least amount of energy so that when you're buying your panel and putting that on, you're only getting exactly what you need and you're not overbuying for that space. We also talked about, how things like solar actually reduce costs, which I think goes against a lot of what I hear is that actually, if you're putting on solar, you need to pay into the system more, right? It's sort of demystifying that myth piece. I want to open it up now. Other thoughts, Nick, Scott, Corey, that you had while you were presenting, while you were listening to others, things you wanted to add, thoughts you had.
I'd love some questions. If we're gonna do
You
that.
got it. So one that came in, how might the utilities attempt to exploit the clean energy transition to the benefit of their shareholders and the detriment of customers? It's quite the question.
I feel like, I don't know. I'll start this and you guys can jump in. I mean, the utilities are very good at working within the rules of the system. If I want to be cynical, I can say, there's a high degree of regulatory capture, to use sort of a loaded and very wonky term. But they're very good at playing the game. And, they're very good at playing defense in terms of walling off opportunities for, let's say, individual investment in resources behind the meter, where maybe the utility sees an opportunity for them to spend the money instead, which then goes to rate base and then enriching returns for investors. I think that's the biggest thing. The risk is of greater regulatory capture than already exists, and that because our laws and regulations and rules haven't really kept pace with the evolution of technology and the evolution of the market, that the utilities are going to exploit a 20th century set of rules for a 21st century set of problems.
Yeah, I guess, to expand on the challenge here, right, is, the threat is that we pay for all of the stranded assets, full cost plus return on investment for shareholders. We build out the new renewable generation, which without demand response in the system is overbuilt and curtailed. And without competition or all resource bidding or any transparency and investor interest in it being as expensive as possible, because that's how you get, returns on your dollar, that adds cost to the system. That additionally build up the transmission system, which is very expensive, and that adds cost to future ratepayers. And then we trap future ratepayers by limiting their ability to adopt efficiency or renewables or escape those charges. That is all baked into the current utility business model, and you can't necessarily blame a utility executive for squeezing every single bit of blood out of the turnip, because those are the rules they play by. But that is going to bake us a cake that's going to leave us completely uncompetitive as a state economy. And it's going to increase costs on businesses, increase costs on homes, and set us up for this kind of like, how can utility investors fail? Because if we can't pay back these costs because we're economically uncompetitive, energy is everything, then the system fails. And so the challenge here is really, how do you rewrite the rules in a way that recognizes the value that the utilities contribute and aligns our interests with the utility interests? So like on this very call, there's a utility stakeholder on this call, and every time we tell people they should use less energy, that utility stakeholder cringes. That's a problem, right? the utility should not be in a position to want to trap us to use more electricity for their own profit, because that is a detriment to all of us. That is, energy is not a plus on the business books; it's a minus. And so I think to further frame that question, there are these two parts, like build a lot, build it expensive. And the second part is trap the ratepayer, increase fixed costs, reduce opportunities for efficiency, reduce opportunities for customer deployment. And so I think we see that in Wisconsin, and it's a difficult conversation to have, because there really at this point isn't a real pathway to address that situation outside of some pretty significant changes.
Heather, I would jump in and I'd answer this probably a little bit differently than maybe some others. The utilities and cooperatives in the state have to be a partner on it. Have to be a partner. They just have to. The way the system is built right now, and it's probably to everybody's advantage that they are a partner in this. I think there's a tendency sometimes from folks to downplay the importance of utilities, downplay the importance of cooperatives, downplay the importance of the grid writ large. It's extremely important, right? It's very, very important. It's going to be important again in this transition for the next century. So that there has to be a partnership there, period. There are important players. There has to be a partnership. I would argue that we have to really markets that are right now competitive and that are oriented towards the consumer and have consumer choice need to stay that way, right? And we need to figure out where we can inject some competition and consumer choice into other markets. But I take the electric vehicles as an example, right? We're going to build out a ton of electric vehicle charging infrastructure in this state and across the country. And the way we do that matters. It matters very, very. Utilities have to be involved as a partner in planning and developing and moving forward with that electric vehicle infrastructure. But I would rather have there be a consumer-oriented market facing public, right? I would rather have the quick trips, and we have a nominally competitive fuel distribution market right now toward retail market, right? Quick Trip does it better than anybody else in the world, in my opinion, right? Better than BP, right? But we have choices as consumers. I would hate to see something change in that situation, right? So there's a small market right there, where we really have to figure out the regulation and the laws correctly so we can maintain that consumer choice and maintain that competition, because that's advantageous at a retail for the ratepayer, or for when you're driving up to the pump, quote unquote.
We're at the end of our time, and I shouldn't ask one more question, but I think we need to, because it's asking about inflation, which is at the top of everyone's mind right now. It's all over the news. It's all over our political ads. Inflation is the place where, the hot topic at this point, and, the impact on everyone's pocketbook at this point. So can you frame renewal or fossil fuel to cause, this person says they're seeing candidates, depending on their stance, framing renewal or fossil fuel to cause the negative impact of inflation. So what's sort of the truth here? What is the generation system that makes us most immune to inflation? Scott, you have something ready? You look like you're
I guess I can take this one because I've spent a little bit of time thinking about this, right? Because I see the campaign ads too, and I get a little bit frustrated by it. There's a real tight tension, and if I'm, strong manning the argument that I hear sometimes, people tend to think about the pie as really like X or Y or versus, right? So people are setting the argument up as we invested in renewables for the last 3 or 5 years, so we didn't invest in natural gas production or oil production or et cetera, et cetera. There's always this, especially at the national level, and politicians play into this because it plays to each base, right? There's this us versus them kind of argument, clean energy versus old energy or fossil fuel energy. And I would really, it's hard for politicians to reject that framing, because that's all we do in this country is pit, one side versus the other. But it doesn't make a lot of sense to me, right? Renewables are happening not at the expense of fossil fuels. but in addition to our investment that we've already made in fossil fuel infrastructure. I would argue going forward, if we can remove as much of our energy generation as possible from volatile commodity markets, from volatile fuel sources that go up in price $100 a barrel and go, I mean, 2 years ago, oil was, what did it hit, a low of negative $40 a barrel on futures markets? I mean, that kind of volatility is, as much as we possibly can sever that chain, it's better for us. And I think Nick pointed it out, Corey, you may have as well. The fuel costs for a solar panel really do not change. Your energy generation and that cost is baked in for 20 or 30 years, right? That is anti-inflationary. That is completely anti-inflationary. And I think we should utilize it as much as possible. The confusion comes in when I think people say, all right, we built that solar farm instead of doing something else to increase the supply of fossil fuels, which I think is just, you're setting up what I think is an unfair us versus them argument.
And Scott, I think that goes back to what Nick said in the beginning about developing them in tandem. It doesn't have to be separate. Everything can be done together. I think Project Drawdown talks about this a lot. You know, there are transition needs. There are things that can be done in tandem. We can develop one while we have the other and get ourselves to a different future. So with that, I want to thank you again, Nick, Corey, and Scott for being here. Of course, CUB for hosting, Lisa for Evolution Marketing support. I have one last thing I need to share on screen 2 here, and then we're wrapped up. Future webinars. If you enjoyed today, please join us again. You know, part of CUB's mission is to help educate residents, ratepayers, and Wisconsin's consumers. Today's program was one of 3 educational webinars we're offering this summer for residential consumers. So save the date for our future programs. Thursday, August 18th and Thursday, September 22nd, both starting at noon. Looking at energy costs, what to do, and action steps for homeowners and renters, building upon the things that we talked about today. You can find all this and more at cubwi.org/events, cubwisconsin.org/events. Thank you for sharing the past hour with us, and that's the end of today's event. Thank you.
Thank you.